I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover news and information the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about. We try to recover some lost history. We try to explain the inexplicable. Today, joining us from his home district, the 5th Congressional District of Tennessee, we have Congressman Andy Ogles joining us. Welcome, Congressman.
And how are you today?
Doing just great, thanks. You've done something I think is very important. It's a matter of documenting misconduct. And so you've tell us about what you've done with respect to Vice President Harris.
Well, so I've introduced articles of impeachment, and there's two sections within, or two articles within the document. But, you know, it's important that, one, we have an obligation. We in the House of Representatives have an obligation. We took an oath to uphold the law, the law of the land, and she has ignored the law of the land. And so I think impeachment of the vice president is important. But there's another component to this. Like, she is going to be the nominee for the Democrats. And what you're seeing is the corporate woke media that's weaponized against you. It's weaponized against me. It's weaponized against your listeners. They're trying to reinvent her and erase her bad history. Because, again, she was one of the worst senators that we had at the time that she was office. She was the border czar. You go through the litany of things that she claims, and then you realize she's against the middle class. She's against you. She's against us. She's against the Republic.
Yeah, she's a very controversial character, and there's an attempt to sort of, rewrite history or attempt to erase certain things or to glorify past performance and conduct. I think President Trump's kind of off-the-cuff remark is accurate, where he said, you know, she talks in rhymes. It's weird, you know. So there's sort of her personal demeanor. I'm not attacking her in the sense of, you know, her individual identity as a human being, but I am talking about her public persona, how she conducts herself, how she carries out her office, her demeanor. And there is a difference, right? Everyone's got flaws. I've got a million of them. But I'm not talking about her individual characteristics of behavior. I'm talking about how it is that she carries out her position as Vice President of the United States. And if you're in that position, you can't do and say weird things. And she really has a remarkable track record of just nonsensical, circular talking. Some people call it a word salad. But what you've brought up is not just those issues, because they're just peculiar all by themselves. You're talking about actual performance measures. So, I mean, you can argue, I think pretty strongly, that she's complicit in an effort to cover up the mental decline, the mental acuity of the President of the United States, putting the country at risk. Is that really the thrust of what your articles are about?
Well, there's two sections. So Section 1 deals with the southern border, and Section 2 deals with, you know, her cover-up and, you know, like you say, complicit involvement in covering up the mental state or lack thereof of President Joe Biden. And so when you go to page 3, line 11, we start laying out, as it pertains to the southern border, all the various crimes that have been committed against Americans. So you have 12, 13, 14-year-old girls being raped by illegals. You've seen it in Iowa and New York and Virginia and Louisiana. You had a girl that was raped and murdered in Texas. None of those crimes should have occurred. We have laws. Our borders should be secure. And Kamala Harris, while vice president, as the borders are, you know, was complicit in allowing this invasion of individuals into our country. Then you jump to Section 2, or the second articles of impeachment, and it talks about there was clearly evidence that Joe Biden was in the state of not just cognitive decline, but a cognitive crash. And she and the media and all of the advisors, Blinken and Mayorkas, et cetera, they conspired to conceal that from the American people. It creates a constitutional issue because, and again, you know, I'm not a doctor, don't pretend to be one, but when you talk to doctors who treat Parkinson's and Parkinson's Parkinson's type illnesses or compounding pharmacists that create the cocktails to treat that illness. There's this balance of the cocktail with prescribed sleep. So you literally could have times in any 24-hour period where the commander-in-chief, meaning Joe Biden, isn't available because he is in induced sleep. Right. The American people deserve to know that. Congress needs to know that, which is why she should have invoked the 25th and why I've got articles of impeachment against her. She is unfit for office. So is Joe Biden.
That's really the crux of this thing, is that when you have this sort of guilty knowledge of something, you're faced with a choice, right? Or at least from the outside analyzing it, the person is either complicit, meaning that they're cooperating, they're involved in essentially a conspiracy to manufacture a false narrative or sort of this Potemkin village front that everything's fine, 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 don't look. So you're either complicit or you're negligent, right? You've checked out. You're busy doing something else. But you can't have it both ways. It's either one or the other, right? Because you're aware of what the facts are. You have an obligation under the law to act, and just whistling past the graveyard and hoping everything's great and nobody notices, that's not fulfilling your duty. And I think that's really the crux of behind what you've filed with regard to the articles. What kind of support do you have from your colleagues?
Well, we introduced the articles and we went on break. And so when we get back from our August work period where we're back home in our districts, I have an election here in just a couple of days. So obviously working hard to finish that out. But, I will say going back, for the State of the Union, President Biden walked in. I was the first Republican he spoke to. So he hugged a couple of Democrats on the other side of the aisle, and he turned and he spoke to me. And I reached down and I shook his hand, and he's the President of the United States. So I was respectful. Hello, Mr. President. Thank you for being here. And I was wearing a button on my lapel for Laken Riley. And I said, right. Mr. President, I want you to take a look at my button. It says Laken Riley, and she was killed because of the southern border, and I need you to do something about it. He pauses for a moment, and he says, Laken Riley. He pauses again, and he says, oh, I like your button. He was unable to connect the phrase or the compound sentence or statement that, A, I want you to look at my button, and then 2, it's the name of a girl who was murdered.
Right.
Only thing that he could process was the first part of that statement of look at my button. And he was like, oh, I like your button. And so the lights were on, but there was nobody home. Right. And so that is the commander-in-chief. Now imagine if you're Putin, or if you're she, or you're some other bad actor in the world, and you see that is the commander-in-chief of the free world. No wonder those bullies are misbehaving, because they know there's no one in the White House, there's no one keeping watch, and you and I right now, we are left alone. And fortunately, we have strong Congress to hold the line.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why, the timing of Hezbollah launching rockets into northern Israel, they know, or Iran knows, because Iran's behind it. Iran knows, hey, it's a weak and wobbly leadership. So one thing I'll be very frank with you is I always get a little frustrated at your colleagues, because they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They're very good at that. And so the leadership, if it was the Democrats, you guys wouldn't go on August break, right? You would be at work 24/7 to impeach Harris. Just think of the sort of the Adam Schiff mentality, right? Mm-hmm. You'd invent some weird process, like he ran an impeachment out of the Intelligence Committee. There would be a full court press to move to impeach Harris right up to her anointing in Chicago at the DNC. And it's a radically different mentality. The left and the Democrats would take every opportunity politically to inflict as much political damage and PR sort of assault to score points and to shape the narrative and to show how she's unfit or she's not capable or she was negligent. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Your colleagues aren't going to do that. And that's, from a very partisan kind of, us versus them point of view, your opposition, there would be no break for summer. It would be 24/7 on every news channel, just criticizing the hell out of them. So
Well, Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis go to waste.
There you
And
go.
what you just said, you hit the nail on the head. They do a great job of driving, first defining and driving the narrative. And so I sent a letter to the speaker saying, hey, we're in the middle of appropriations. We have all of this unfinished business, like perhaps let's just have the conversation as to whether or not we impeach Kamala Harris and or Joe Biden.
Right.
And we should stay in August. So this idea of an August recess or an August work period should be contingent on getting your 12 appropriations bills done. It should be contingent on finishing the unfinished business of the House. And so I'm with you. We should have stayed. I would have stayed. And yes, that would have meant vacations were canceled. And look, my kids are going back to school. It would have been sacrifices, personally. But that I signed up for this job. So let's stay and work. Let's get her done. Not to mention, we're going into probably the most consequential election in modern times in November, where if we don't correct course, I always liken it to the Titanic. We're on a path. There is a collision ahead, and if we don't correct course, it's going to be catastrophic. We know this, so why are we taking a break? It does not make sense to me. Let's work, let's get her done, let's impeach Kamala Harris. I was with Trump, I talked to him about this, he agreed. Let's impeach Kamala Harris.
All right, and even when it comes to, you mentioned sort of in passing appropriations, the appropriations process to date, you and your colleagues are funding Joe Biden 100%. Everything he asks for, everything he looks for. Jack Smith in the Department of Justice funded 100%. You have an opportunity to create pressure and leverage.
That's right.
And from my perspective, Mike Johnson's a fine man. I'm not attacking him personally. But what I am saying is that there's a leadership failure. There are opportunities to exert pressure. There are opportunities to sort of use all the mechanisms that are available to you. Your opposition would certainly do it, and it's kind of like everybody loses interest, or the attention span of a kindergartner, and you're off to the next thing. And so, I admire you for getting it on the record about Kamala Harris. You've drawn up these articles, you got it on the record. It's an important thing to do. I just wish that for the full exercise of this, there's got to be accountability, right? Judicial Watch, we're in the business of asking all sorts of unpleasant questions and investigating all kinds of things that nobody likes to investigate. And we do what we can as best as we can, but you have the full weight and power of the United States government. I don't know why, it just doesn't make sense. I know that if I was a speaker, or if I was had somebody with the horsepower of the government behind me, there's all sorts of things I would do, and I wouldn't go on break. But Congressman, I'll give you credit for doing what you've done. I appreciate it. Didn't see anybody else doing it, and I just wish that you had the full support of your leadership in exercising all the power that you have.
Well, it's one of those, to your point, there's got to be accountability. And like in any negotiation we go into, because look, we don't have the Senate, they're not going to pick up our bill. So whether it's Israel, whether it's the border, whether it's the budget, whether it's spending, we should present the bill that we want to pass in the first 100 days, provided we win the Senate, the House, and the White House, understanding that we're not going to get that. But you start having the conversation, you make that proposal and presentation to the American public, like, let's have that debate. John Quincy Adams loved the House of Representatives because that's where you argued and debated. And right now, everybody wants to go to cocktail parties and shake hands. And I want to argue and debate. Let's get her done because we're about to have the first 100 days and we've got a lot of work to be done. And so we can't wait till then. So let's put forward those tough conversations. Let's have those debates. Let's disagree, but let's come to the best outcome for the American people.
Yeah, I want to see an excruciating, painful, explicit debate on why the Ukrainian border is more important than our southern border. Go ahead, tell me why. Tell me why the Ukrainian border, they get hundreds of billions of dollars, and the U.S. border, shh, don't worry about it. We'll just roll over and play dead. Let's get everybody on the record about that. That's a sort of, at least in my view, that's the sort of work that should be done, and the sort of time that should be spent. Because when you box people in and you say, look, we're going to have a vote, you get to pick which side, where do you want the money to go? That creates not just advantage or power or leverage to get what you want done, but it makes things real clear for the American public. And I just think that, anyway, enough of my editorializing. I just think that that's the approach that should be taken, and I encourage you and your colleagues. I know there's a lot of guys in the Freedom Caucus who would all be singing amen to what I'm saying here, but it's just it's a missed opportunity. So.
Well, I mean, so I'm on the board of the House Freedom Caucus. We tend to be the tip of the spear of driving us to the right, making us more conservative. But to your point in Ukraine, I've been against every supplemental and the spending there, because we spent more in Ukraine in any given year, since the war began, than we spend on our own Marine Corps. I've got a problem with that. Let's secure our border first. Let's fund our troops first. Let's make sure that their benefits, our veterans, are taken care of first. Once we check all of those boxes, then I'm willing to have that other conversation. But since we're not doing the first three that I just mentioned, I'm not willing to have that conversation. Let's secure our border. Let's fund our troops. Let's take care of our veterans. Maybe then we can talk about Ukraine.
Right. And just one last point on this. The death and casualty rate from fentanyl is higher than our losses in World War II.
That's right.
We are losing more death, and then there's always not just the death, but the consequences that come from that, the harm to families and communities. That casualty rate is higher than what we suffered in World War II, and the discussion of it is superficial at best. So I respect what you're doing, and I appreciate your time very much, Congressman.
Thank you so much, and God bless.
I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.